This man had just bought a new house and was eager to make it his own. It was old and needed some work, but that didn't scare him. But what did raise alarms was what he found in his attic. At first, he thought they were just balls of insulation, but then an expert told the homeowner this, making him want to move out as soon as possible. But before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Ben didn't mind that the house needed some work. It was old, dusty, and slightly drafty, but the price was fair, and it came with a spacious attic. He'd only lived there for 2 weeks and was finally ready to tackle the upstairs. The lower floors were mostly in order, and now it was time to sort out the attic for storage. Ben wasn't sentimental, but he wasn't ready to throw it all away either. He figured the attic would become a forgotten storage space. Nothing more. The folding ladder creaked under his weight as he climbed into the attic. As Ben lifted his body up through the hatch-like door that formed his attic's entry point, he admitted to himself that he did not really visit this part of the house when buying it. To him, an attic was never really a deal breaker when putting down money for a nice home. But this decision would come back to haunt him because this upstairs place held big secrets. Ben walked across the wooden boards, checking for weak spots, testing each plank with the pressure of his foot. There, near the far beam, something round and pale stuck out. It was tucked between 2 angled supports, and from a distance, it didn't seem like much. But it was enough to pique Ben's curiosity. It looked curly, almost coiled in a very organic kind of way. Ben stepped forward and crouched down beside it. He reached for the object but stopped when he noticed there wasn't just one. The second one was half hidden behind a support beam, identical in shape and size. He grabbed his phone from his back pocket and snapped a photo. Maybe one of his friends would know what it was. Ben returned down the ladder and closed the hatch behind him. The attic didn't feel threatening exactly, but there was something about those objects that made him uneasy. Still, he wanted to know the full truth before handling the yellowish objects. Ben also did not want to place his excess stuff up there now because that would only block access to these things. So Ben decided to call his roofer. Ben took out his phone and dialed the number. The phone rang, and for a full minute, nobody answered. Then a voice popped up. "Carter's Roof and Brickwork here. How can I help?" Ben looked at the furry balls before him and replied, "Marco, it's me, Ben. I know we planned for you to come by next week, but I have an issue that requires your attention now." "Could you come over?" Ben asked politely. Marco sounded frustrated and stated that he was very busy, so coming by so unannounced was difficult for him. But when Ben sent him a picture of these strange balls, the roofer suddenly became very quiet. "Marco, are you still there?" Ben asked after a long period of silence. "I'll be there in 10, Marco suddenly said. Marco arrived exactly 9 minutes later, his dusty red van pulling into the driveway faster than usual. Ben met him at the door, but the roofer didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Let's see it," he said, stepping inside. He still hadn't commented on the photo Ben had sent him. Something about the silence made Ben uneasy, but he led Marco upstairs toward the attic anyway. The roofer didn't say much as Ben unfolded the ladder and climbed up first. Marco followed close behind, stepping into the attic with a practiced eye. He didn't step any closer. "Are there more?" he asked. Ben shook his head. "Not that I've seen." Marco crouched beside the closest ball but didn't touch it. He studied it closely, squinting. Then he leaned back and exhaled through his nose. "I've worked on a lot of old houses," he said. "Seen nests, rot, mold, you name it. But I've never seen anything that looks like this." He pulled a flashlight from his belt and shone it directly into the cluster of curls. Marco reached into his coat and pulled on a pair of thin gloves. "Not what I think. I figured it was insulation material, even if it was the strangest one I've ever seen. If it's not that, then what is it?" Marco shook his head and said it was better to show than tell. After securing his gloves around his hands, he finally dared to touch one of the mysterious balls. Marco gently lifted one of them off the ground. The roofer rested the fluffy bale on his palms and held it between them. "Put on gloves too. I don't want you touching this," Marco pressed. The gloves were on, and Marco now transferred the strange thing onto Ben's hands. It was light, much lighter than expected, and felt slightly spongy. As Ben turned it in his hands to look at the ball from a different angle, something suddenly broke loose. Something small and dark that was first buried deep within the fibrous structure now tumbled onto the attic floor. It looked like a bead at first, but when it rolled to a stop, Ben could swear it pulsed slightly. Marco saw it too. Neither man spoke for a long moment. The quiet in the attic felt heavier now, like the air had thickened. "That's not insulation," Marco finally said. "And it's not plant material either. Someone placed them here." He put the ball down carefully and stood up. "I've got a guy," he said, "someone who has dealt with these objects before. If anyone can identify this, it's him. Marco then asked a question that would become very significant later. How much did you buy this property for? Ben was taken aback a bit by this personal question. Why did his roofer want to know the price he paid for the house? But given that Marco showed every intention of helping, he chose to share this number. I only paid $200,000 for this house, a steal. And that number seemed to strike some sort of recollection within Marco's mind, because after hearing the amount, he let out a deep sigh. So they've got you too. I can't say much more because this situation is delicate, but know that for your own safety, you should not stay inside this house tonight. I promise we will fix this, and I will tell you everything tomorrow. Ben agreed immediately. He didn't need more convincing. Marco took a photo of the object with his work phone and then stepped down the attic ladder. Don't move them, he warned, and don't try to open them. Ben nodded, though he wasn't. Sure, he'd even be able to sleep, knowing those things were present in his attic. Marco promised to come back by morning with help. That night, Ben couldn't settle. He was allowed to stay at his neighbor's house for the time being, although it took some convincing. The window of their guest room overlooked his attic, and that view messed with Ben's mind. He couldn't stop staring, knowing what lay behind that attic window. Even when Ben got into bed, he woke up numerous times to revisit the view. He kept thinking about the way that black bead rolled out of the ball, how it looked like it vibrated and moved on its own. Ben took out the photo again, the one he sent to the expert. He zoomed in and then noticed a thin cloud of mist hovering around the fluffy object. It wasn't something he had noticed before, but it would prove to be very important. In the early morning, Marco called back. My friend's name is Jordan. He's worked pest control, mold inspection, and even helped some science teams upstate with structural biocontamination cases. He'll come by around noon. Just keep that attic closed till then. Ben agreed. He spent the next few hours nervously pacing around the garden, checking his house from the outside. Pieces of this puzzle were just getting more and more complex. Ben tried to put things in order and remember what he knew at this point. A 1, according to the expert, people placed the fluffy balls there, but Marco wouldn't say who. 2, they were dangerous to touch, and black beads fell out that moved and vibrated on their own. And 3, some high-level pest control and mold expert was coming to his house with Marco today to help solve what was going on. These things didn't make sense together. Did people place a serious contamination inside his house on purpose? That didn't make sense, right? And what was so sensitive and secretive about his situation? It almost felt like Marco was trying to scare him. At exactly 12, a dark blue pickup pulled into the driveway. A tall man in his 40s stepped out, wearing heavy boots and a canvas jacket. He carried no equipment, just a small metal case. The other side of the car also opened up, and from it, Marco emerged, as promised. Ben introduced himself and led the men inside without much talking. Ben introduced himself and led the expert inside. Marco gave me little details, so I can't really explain what is up there, Ben said as he bobbed behind the 2 experts, trying to keep up. But Jordan stated that Marco had already filled him in and that he knew exactly what to expect. Here, put on gloves. We don't want to touch anything. Jordan climbed the ladder confidently and moved straight to the 2 objects. He didn't flinch or hesitate like Marco had. Instead, he knelt beside one and removed a small flashlight from his coat. He examined them quietly, then opened his metal case and removed what looked like flexible tweezers. Ben stayed on the ladder's top step, watching from a short distance away. The tweezers pierced the fluffy surface. It didn't break apart or crumble like old insulation. Instead, the outer layer stretched slightly, making at least 20 or more of those black beads fall out. They scattered across the attic floor. Some even fell down the open hatch that Ben stood in. This time, Ben saw it clearly. These black beads were creating that strange mist. They rolled in every direction, moving further than expected. Some made unnatural turns that defied gravity or logic. It was as if they were self-propelled or remotely controlled. Jordan suddenly turned to Ben, asking if the mist or beads touched him. Luckily, Ben could confirm they hadn't. Though confused, he answered truthfully. Then the experts began dismantling the attic ceiling. Ben had always assumed insulation lay behind the wooden beams, but they revealed something far more disturbing. With some effort, the experts created a large hole in the ceiling, exposing the roof, tile sand, dozens more of the fluffy vessels. These were not random. They were deliberately installed to carry the black beads and their strange mist, slowly releasing it into the attic and, eventually, the entire house. Marco turned to Ben, explaining that they suspected the real estate company who sold him the house was responsible. To support his claim, Marco removed another beam and a swarm of mice and rats poured out. Ben nearly fell from the ladder in shock. Even the 2 experts stepped back. The rodents frantically pursued the scattered beads, gnawing at them in the wooden floor soaked in mist. The situation escalated quickly. The mist triggered uncontrollable behavior in the pests. They chewed through flooring with such intensity that the structure was beginning to fail. Ben panicked, ready to abandon the house, but Marco stopped him. That was the exact reaction the perpetrators wanted. He revealed that this wasn't the first time they'd encountered this scenario. Over the years, several homeowners had been driven out by rodent infestations, with the same black beads found each time. By the time experts were called, the company had already cleaned up the evidence, avoiding detection. But this time was different. They were finally ahead of the scheme. Marco predicted Ben had an upcoming meeting with the company just as others had. It was all part of a larger trap. The houses were marketed as dream homes, but secretly loaded with these devices. At night, the beads activated, distributing rodent-attracting mist throughout the house, then returning to their vessels like robotic cleaners. The infestation would then drive the owners to desperation. The company would return, posing as a helpful buyer, offering only half the house's value. Feeling helpless, owners would accept the deal. The company would clean up and repeat the cycle. Ben was furious. He had been tricked and nearly ruined, but now he had allies and evidence. Marco and Jordan had finally captured the operation in progress. They documented everything and contacted the authorities, who had been tracking the company but lacked proof until now. With solid evidence, arrests followed quickly, lawsuits mounted, and prison sentences were handed out. Victims were compensated, including Ben. With the payout, Ben restored his home. What once seemed like a nightmare became an opportunity. His house was now clean, rodent-free, and Securia a true blessing in disguise.